justice. And these inequities are due to systemic factors that cause these same communities to live and grow up in less clean environments with fewer opportunities. And these inequities are due to systemic factors only contribute to these environmental injustices. So we need to transition to a clean energy, grow up in a clean energy future that is just and inclusive and equitable. This has been a point of discussion for our task force on climate change, and we've worked to center equity and environmental justice throughout all of our work. And our Office of Sustainability and Clean Energy is being led by Maria Redmond, and she's your moderator today. And she's also been working to develop our state's clean energy plan, which I couldn't be more excited about. This will help us meet our goals. And we all know that a clean energy future means endless opportunities for our state. New businesses, new technologies, new job creation, a means to provide family supporting jobs to more and more people all across Wisconsin, and also attracting and retaining talent. And that's not where it ends. And I do believe that our administration, along with your support, can lay the foundation to move Wisconsin to a place where powering our lives does not come at the cost of our planet, but in fact, it comes with opportunity. So thanks again for your commitment to fighting for our future, and also for our planet's future. I look forward to continuing to partner with you on this work, and hopefully I'll be seeing you all in person someday soon. Until then, stay safe, and thanks so much.
All right, thank you, Lieutenant Governor Barnes. Sorry for those technical issues. I invite all of our panelists to unmute themselves and share their video. So to help us explore this topic more in depth, we were very fortunate to have an expert panel of scholars, both from UW-Madison and a UW alum who's now at Northeastern University, who all in different ways focused on energy and climate issues in their research, teaching, and outreach. To introduce today's panelists and moderate this virtual panel discussion, I'm pleased to welcome Maria Redmond. Ms. Redmond, as you may have heard just now from Lieutenant Governor Burns, serves as the director of the Wisconsin Office of Sustainability and Clean Energy. And in that role, she's leading the development of a comprehensive statewide clean energy plan to actively implement the use of clean energy resources and technology to help the state reach 100% carbon-free electricity by 2050 goal. So welcome, Maria.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. It looks like we got a great turnout, over 200 people. Welcome. And it looks like also from all over the US. So that's wonderful. I am honored to be here today to moderate this panel. I started this position in January of this year as the director of the Office of Sustainability and Clean Energy. And we are in the process, as the Lieutenant Governor mentioned, to launch a clean energy planning process. And as part of that process, we're really going to try to identify key strategies and collective consensus on how to move forward with decarbonization in Wisconsin. And it's about stakeholder engagement and making sure that we're hearing as many voices in our communities as possible and ensuring that there's meaningful involvement across the state. And so I'm really excited to kick off that work and also to make sure that we're keeping environmental justice, climate justice, equity, and affordability as a lens in everything that we do for the state. So I don't want to talk too much. I really want to get to the panelists. And so what I'll briefly do is just introduce all of the panelists, and then I will volley it over to each one of them to give them, let them talk about this energy and climate justice from their perspectives. So our first panelist is Shalonda Baker, and she is a professor of law at the Public Policy and Urban Affairs at Northeastern University School of Law. We also have with us today Jessica LeClaire. She's a clinical instructor at the School of Nursing at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And we also have Joel Rogers, who's the Noam Chomsky Professor of Law, Political Science, Public Affairs, and Sociology at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So I will pass it over to Shalonda to give a few opening remarks.
Thank you so much, Maria, and thank you, Scott, for all of your care and diligence in pulling this together. I'm incredibly impressed to see a 220-person turnout on a midweek night, in a time when we're all spending a lot of time on Zoom. So I want to just start also by doing a brief land acknowledgement. I am zooming in today from land that was stolen from the Wampanoag and Massachusetts and Nipmuc tribes here in what is now called Massachusetts. I'm streaming in from Boston. So as Maria said, I am a professor of law, public policy, and urban affairs. So I'm a lawyer by training, and my work focuses on energy justice. So by day, I teach law students and undergraduates, and also public policy, PhDs, and master students about energy justice. And by night, which has become increasingly the case, I run an organization called the Initiative for Energy Justice. And that organization was founded by myself and two other lawyers of color who were each on the front lines of the climate and energy transition. So before I started my current role at Northeastern, I was a professor at the University of Hawaii. And I got to be in Hawaii during that state's remarkable transition away from, or at the beginning of its transition, it's still ongoing, transition away from fossil fuels. While I was there, the state embarked on a goal of 100% renewable energy by 2045. Simultaneously around the country, my colleagues in California and New York were also involved in very ambitious energy transitions. And what we each recognized was that community voices were excluded from the policy conversations and debates concerning the energy transition. In our states, folks who were at the table, the primary stakeholders and policymakers were particularly interested in the technical aspects of the transition. They didn't really see this transition as one with the potential to transform the social conditions of people in their states. So we together launched the Initiative for Energy Justice, which you can find more about by, maybe we'll post it at some point, or I can drop it into the chat. But I want to talk a little bit about this moment, just by way of introducing myself and also how I'm seeing the landscape right now. We are in a moment of reckoning, an extraordinary reckoning with the things that we have come to accept as natural and inevitable parts of our society. That inequality that was always there even before COVID is now reaching up, poking up through the surface and being flayed open by this pandemic. I would argue that the energy system is not immune from that reckoning with inequality, that reckoning with structural violence, that reckoning with racism. As the Lieutenant Governor so beautifully and eloquently stated, we have communities around the country who are disproportionately burdened by environmental hazards, and they are breathing in toxic fumes that make them more vulnerable to this pandemic. The same communities bear disproportionate energy burdens, so they're routinely paying more, sometimes up to 40, 50, 60% of overall income just to pay for electricity and energy. These same communities also, as the Lieutenant Governor said, are being left behind in this clean energy transition. There are recent studies showing that communities of color simply do not have the same penetration rates of clean energy, local clean energy, rooftop solar. And that's even when you correct for income and even when you correct for home ownership rates, which are typically the go-tos when people say, oh, they don't own their homes. Oh, they have different incomes. No, there's a disparity there that we have to reckon with. And so these are the same communities that are also vulnerable to shutoffs due to the economic crisis induced by this pandemic, which is killing Black and brown people at alarming rates. And so we have to reckon with this. And I think we can reckon with it through energy policy. Again, I work on energy justice issues, and that has been the focus of my work. But I would also argue that the same cries, or I would compel us or urge us to think that the same cries in the streets where folks were flooding into the streets over the summer and into the fall saying we can't breathe, they connect to the energy system, right? Those calls for breath connect to the environmental justice communities burdened for so long by our energy system. And those same communities calling for racial justice in the criminal justice system are saying, stop killing us. And I would urge us to think about the energy system as a tool and instrument for causing harm in the same ways that our criminal justice system does. So these things are linked. We have to reckon with them. I'm excited about our panel today and really getting into this. And I see we already have a very active chat. So let's do it. I look forward to hearing from Joel and Jessica this evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to pass it over to Jessica.
Yeah, thank you so much, Shalonda and Maria. Just kind of sitting with all of that. That was wonderful. Hi, everyone. And my name is Jessica LeClaire. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And I am an instructor and also a second-year PhD student studying nursing strategies for environmental justice with the UW-Madison School of Nursing. And so I also want to thank the Wisconsin Energy Institute for inviting me to join this incredible panel discussion tonight. And I want to express gratitude also for the lands, the waters, the more than human worlds that sustain our lives. And also to reiterate, because I live in Madison, gratitude for the Ho-Chunk Nation for their perseverance and leadership, and acknowledge that sovereignty of the land we call Madison has never been willingly ceded. And we must commit to listening to learning from, partnering with, and incorporating the experience of Native nations in our work. So as I shared my perspective on climate justice and the associated health effects, I also want to acknowledge my positionality as someone who identifies as a white woman, who is cisgendered, able-bodied, with many social identities that are dominant in our society. And so there's a lot that I do not know. And everything I have learned on this topic is from listening with curiosity to the generous sharing of knowledge and ways of living by those who identify as Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, and possess many intersecting marginalized social identities. And also I want to acknowledge that as a newer member of the academic community, my perspective is heavily based in experience and practice as a public health nurse. And so I have worked as a public health nurse for many years, first for the Ho-Chunk Nation, and then for Public Health Madison and Dane County. And in 2018, I decided to become a nursing instructor with the mission to educate our future nursing workforce about planetary health issues such as climate change. And I did this because I have witnessed how accelerated climate change has affected the health of our local communities for at least a decade, probably more. And so we know that Wisconsin is becoming warmer and wetter with more frequent and extreme weather events. And because of environmental racism, some people are closer to the front lines of these extreme weather events than others. And as public health nurses, we have relationships with people who experience these inequitable distributions of environmental hazards that we heard about earlier, and subsequent health inequities due to oppression from racism, from socioeconomic and/or immigration status, and other social identities. And many of these social identities intersect, right? And so when we experience oppression from multiple sources, we can become further weathered and less resilient in the face of public health emergencies like climate breakdown, like COVID-19, and so on. And so racism is a public health crisis. And I just want to share a quick story about my first light bulb moment about this intersection of climate, justice, environmental racism, and health. And this is a story that I've shared many times over the years because I've learned that people tend to think of climate injustices in relation to some horrendous coastal events far away from us, hurricanes like Katrina and so on. However, in Midwest cities like Madison, we've also been experiencing climate injustices for a very long time, but more sort of like a chronic disease or some slow growing tumor that's starting to metastasize, right? So around 2012, I was working with a low-income neighborhood in Madison to address some resident concerns about lack of healthy opportunities for youth. And this is one of our most diverse neighborhoods with residents of many different races and ethnicities and languages from all around the world. And at a neighborhood meeting, a local elementary school principal mentioned that children from this neighborhood were increasingly missing school because of increased asthma symptoms and other breathing problems over the last few years. And the families right away shared how their apartment buildings, which were built in the heart of a floodplain, had not recovered from the flooding in 2008. And by 2012, their basements were boarded up due to the mold that had also seeped into the vents. And so every time it rained even a few inches, their basements and yards flooded because their apartment buildings are literally sinking into the ground. And many service providers in the meeting wanted to do something and take immediate action and have these solutions. But the families asked that we please not call building inspection, please don't talk to the landlords or get out our environmental health sanitarians involved because they very much feared eviction. Now, Madison has very few affordable housing options, and parents told us that they would rather stay in their unhealthy apartments than sleep in their cars. So rather than place the burden on this community in the front lines of climate change, I met with a stormwater engineer who shared that the water in his neighborhood is so high because of the lake levels, and the lake levels were controlled by the state DNR, and whose hands were tied because the lakefront property owners, they wanted to maintain their docks and their boats and their property values. And I was told that it was beyond the control of the city, and that was the end of the story at that time. But of course, the story is not over. The ongoing flooding concern was highlighted again in 2016. Residents were noticing increased frequency in rainfall, storms, and flooding from a neighborhood creek that was pouring out onto adjacent streets, creeping up onto lawns and flooding basements. And a resident shared video footage of children playing in the floodwaters, which we can assume contained sewage, bacteria, and mold. And this particular creek is also known to carry agricultural chemicals. So I know my time is running out, so I'll wrap up the story quickly. Of course, things are only getting worse. In 2018, across our entire state, we experienced terrible storms and flooding. We had 9 to 15 inches in Dane County alone, which resulted in 1 death, and residents all along our isthmus have experienced continued terrible flooding, are sandbagging their homes. And so now this climate emergency is spreading, it's metastasizing, right? So beyond our most marginalized populations, it has the attention of those with political power. And so there are conversations happening up at the local, at the state levels about addressing this ongoing climate emergency, but it does remain a very complicated issue. So I just want to end my opening comments by saying that the solutions for combating this public health emergency are right in front. Lieutenant Governor Barnes opened our conversation tonight with, we know that working to slow down the damage to our climate is a net gain with the health and the social justice lens. And promoting health and racial equity should be central components of strategies designed to combat the health effects of climate change. Climate justice recognizes climate change as a human and a civil rights issue. And so in practice, it requires ensuring the fair treatment and inclusiveness of historically and currently marginalized people who are most affected when creating policies and practices that address climate change. If we want to protect our health during this climate emergency, we have to actively work to dismantle racist systems of oppression and white supremacy. And I'm excited to engage in this discussion to promote climate justice and planetary health with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jessica. I like your referral to being solutions oriented, because that's really, we've identified that there's a huge systemic problem here and that we need to start moving toward solutions. So thank you for pointing that out. Our next speaker, Joel Rogers, I will pass the mic over to you. You have to unmute, Joel.
So sorry.
I
was just thanking you, Maria, and Scott, and others who organized this really amazing panel. From Mandela's remarks at the beginning to what Maria said, and then Shalonda and Jessica, I think more or less everything's been said already. I mean, not quite everything, not quite everyone has said it. But I don't really want to repeat everything that they just said. It's a very business-dominated polity we have here, with a very, very long, very, very deep racist and vis-a-vis Native people's imperialist past. It's a very violent past, and And the past isn't dead. It's not even past, as Faulkner said many years ago. And it's inscribed in a series of practices, our land use, our environmental laws, our city management, our housing codes. To go back to what Jessica was saying, there's a lot of stuff. We have a lot of work to be done to begin to get anywhere close to this country's radical founding ideals of a place where birth doesn't determine fate and skin color doesn't determine opportunity, and we are actually a free and equal community of a community of equals. We're a million miles from that. And Wisconsin, which used to be a leader on a lot of this stuff, has indeed fallen well behind other states in its in a lot of its environmental law, and certainly the regulation of its energy, and its making the clean energy transition. So I'm very hopeful, Maria, that you and Mandela and other people are going to get us whipped back into shape and moving forward, with the new task force and other things. It's not as if we could not do that. We have huge opportunities before us right now to make tremendous progress on all sorts of things. A thing that we at COWS have worked on some in the past, and I'd love to see the state move on it a little bit more aggressively than it has, is energy efficiency itself. I mean, leave aside capturing the photons and a little bit of wind that we have in Wisconsin to do clean, renewable energy generation. We export about $15 billion a year out of the state for fossil fuels produced elsewhere, which we use not just in transportation, but in the heating and cooling of our buildings. And that's work which could be begun tomorrow and could be scaled up and would have tremendously good effects both on people living in those buildings and their employment opportunities and the income and a variety of other things. And similarly with community solar and other things, we can do much better than we're doing. So I'd like to just get into the discussion of next steps and how we're going to not be daunted by the fantastic enormity of the world's grief and this country's grief, and try to move humbly forward together toward a somewhat better future. Let me just end it there.
Thank you so much, Joel. That's spot on. I think let's definitely get into this discussion. I have a few questions, and then it looks like we've got some questions already coming in from the audience, and definitely want to get those questions as well. So I'll kick us off with the first question, and then feel free to jump in if you have an immediate answer, and we'll get around to everybody commenting if you'd like to comment. But the first question I have for you is, what would you say to somebody who's really interested or knowledgeable about energy technologies, but who has never connected the dots between racial and social justice and energy? What are some of the ways that these topics are interrelated for someone who's interested in this?
I love that question because it's actually what I spend a lot of my time doing. And it was very much, the entry point to my work on energy justice. And I should be clear that when I started this work, I started about a decade ago, but when I started really on the domestic side of things, it was about 2014 in Hawaii. And there was no terminology called energy justice, but we just made it up and said, hey, we're going to start an energy justice program at the law school. We'll figure out what that means later. But I ended up having a lot of conversations with policymakers, with solar developers, with stakeholders about the technology needed to facilitate this transition. And the thing that I often said is that there are rules that sort of dictate the distributive benefits of these technologies. And these rules, we have to ensure that we are creating rules that make sure that we distribute these technologies in a way that is beneficial, and that from the siting, and I think Joel kind of touched on this, from the siting of facilities, and someone in the question, the Q&A also was talking about siting. So from the siting of facilities, all the way to sort of the externalities that could be associated with them, the impacts, to the economic benefits that flow from the technologies themselves. There are rules, and we have to design our energy system to ensure that the rules that are a part of that equitably and fairly allocate the goods and bads of those technologies. The more and more I get into this work, I also sort of realize just how intimate the energy system impacts the daily lives of people. And that kind of goes to Jessica's story around climate change, right? There is an intimacy in terms of being able to turn on my light or buying groceries, right? Or, having wind whistle through my home because I don't have a properly weatherized home. There's an intimacy there and a comfort that comes when you have when you have access to clean, reliable energy. So again, I try to connect that technology and the sort of invisibility of the energy system to distributive impacts, as well as to the intimacy and the relationship that many of us who are middle class just come to take for granted. But for those of us who grew up working class and who struggled, we understand that intimacy, that the energy system, that relationship that we have with the energy system.
Marie, you want the others of us to chime in?
Yeah. Yeah, if you would like to chime in, yeah, go for it.
So I don't know what the background is of the person who asked the question, but I would start, assuming you have a little bit of a technical background, I would just go look at the Berkeley lab, look at their spaghetti diagram of energy consumption in the U.S., and you'll see that 66% of what we generate is wasted. It's wasted in heat or a variety of other things. And you carry that waste down to our deployment of our production and consumption of energy in any neighborhood anywhere around you. Don't worry, I'm not trying to repeal the second law of thermodynamics, right? I understand that during the energy transitions, it becomes less available. But the level of waste in this country, not just the level of racism or business domination, but just the sheer level of waste is something that is always worth keeping in mind, or I found useful to keep in mind. When you look at average households, take the middle of the income distribution, take the third quintile, that is the middle fifth of the income distribution. What do they spend their money on? They spend their money on housing and transportation, utility bills, and healthcare. Those things together comprise about 66% of that middle income household. And all those things are provided elsewhere at much higher level of quality at less than half the cost than they are in the US. Think about that waste and then layer that on the distribution of economic opportunity and reward in the US, and put then 2 and 2 together. I'm sure anyone could do that, and that's the story on the effect of energy on inequity. The poor pay more for virtually all those things. In effect, they pay more in 2 ways: a larger share of their income because they have less income, and B, they are more subject to a quite predatory retail system and purchasing system and home ownership system and transportation system, right? Each one of those things. And then look at the distribution of Black and brown people and Native Americans in terms of who's poor in America, and that's the connection. I don't know how much more complicated you want to make. There's a lot of waste which falls on a very, very, very unequally distributed country.
Yeah, I can just add a little bit to that. I always point to the climate and the energy justice experts that we have here, but as a nurse, I speak more to the health inequities that result um, from dirty energy, and then the health co-benefits and promotion of health equity we could achieve from promoting clean energy. And so we know that air pollution, for example, from combustion of dirty energy really causes inflammation in people's bodies. And so when you're living near incinerators or other, types of air pollutants, that can get into not only the lungs, but it can get into reproductive organs. It can actually lead to brain diseases and premature births. And so when we promote clean energy solutions, we're actually also promoting health equity as well, and decreasing health inequities. And it's actually and Cal is actually has done reports. Joel's group has done reports for Madison that really quantifies that in terms of cost to the health system, cost to the city, and so on. So cost savings when just looking at health and clean energy solutions.
Yep.
Yeah, I think all great responses. This is an extension of that, but like one of the statistics that appalls me is the amount that we spend on energy here in the state. We're a net energy importer. So that means we're a net money exporter, and we're, for our energy needs annually, the Office of Energy Innovation over at the Public Service Commission reported that we spent $19.4 billion on energy, of which a little over 14 billion of that leaves the state. And so when we're looking at solutions, Joel, you mentioned this, that, we're wasting. What are your thoughts on, solutions, and, what are the highest leverage solutions that we can be looking at that can mitigate some of the harmful effects from, a health perspective or economic perspective?
Well, I don't want to be a dog on a bone here, but if you've got a lot of waste, first thing to do is get rid of that waste and then capture the benefits in income and in health that waste is producing. I mean, I don't know if you guys notice, but it often gets cold here in the winter, and there's a lot of heating that goes out the windows, basically. The 14 point whatever, I thought it was 50, it was up to 15 billion was the net loss in Wisconsin. I misquoted that. But 15 billion, a billion here, a billion there, pretty soon you're talking serious money. And a huge share of that 15 billion is completely unnecessary. I mean, you could make every building. A simple thing is energy retrofits. It's not the only thing you should do, but there are buildings all over, and all over Wisconsin, buildings are operating well below their possible level of energy consumption. Let's assume that you haven't yet made the transition. You're still using natural gas, or you're using oil, or you're using, I think some places in Wisconsin still use coal, and a few of them actually use wood, which is sort of all amazing. But even when they're using those essentially dirty fuels, leave aside the wood calculation for a second, we could tremendously reduce the amount that they're consuming. And to go back to what Shalana said before, the average middle class family spends maybe 3-4% of their income on heating and cooling their home. It's a fair amount of money, but they have it to spend. You go to the north side of Milwaukee, and there are apartments there where people are spending as much as 30-40% of their income literally just heating their own home. And that is, as close to an atrocity as you're likely to find. All that stuff is unnecessary. Now, how do you retrofit a home? Well, you start with the rim joists and work out from there. Forget about the windows. Everyone wants to know about the windows, but there are all sorts of ways in which you caulk cracks, and you put in insulation, and you crawl around in the attic with the mouse turds and other things, which is a real fun thing to do. I can tell you from experience on a hot summer day. But you insulate the homes, and you get the cracks out. That's the way to begin. And it's quite possible, and there are examples of this all over the country, not in Wisconsin, unfortunately, where the utilities, the Public Service Commission says, okay, we are going to let you borrow the cost of doing that work and pay for it off the savings that you will then get from retrofitting your home. You can do that on your meter. And so there's no problem with transferring the home or moving from the apartment or whatever. You can capture the savings very, very effectively and reliably. You can bank on that. You can do it. It's been done in Pennsylvania. It's being done in lots of other states around the country. And it's just finally a matter of political power on the one hand, getting the PSC to order the investor-owned utilities to put it on the darn bill, and then a whole bunch of community outreach to tell people the availability of the opportunity. It's called pay as you save. You can be guaranteed a lower energy bill than you have now, and eventually a very much lower after you pay for all the work being done than you have now. It increases the value of your home. It improves the quality of the air within your home. You know, it's just a win, 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 win. The only thing standing in the way of it are people who profit from the current waste. And that's where you really need a government to kick them or cuff them about the ears. But the other thing that's great about energy efficiency as a thing to do is that the jobs range from incredibly technical, complicated jobs to jobs for which you don't need a huge amount of prior training. You need some training, you certainly need standards. And Jessica, you know, in the healthcare industry, it goes from, essentially nursing assistants to janitorial service to other people, all the way up to, you don't have to be a neuroscientist or an Einstein to retrofit a building. And there's no reason why you shouldn't get paid for doing all of that work. So the work is varied, it has different skill levels, and it has tremendous possibilities in the future for entire careers. That's a $60 billion energy efficiency industry in the US. Wisconsin should get a bigger part of that, starting with its own buildings. Sorry to go on, but that was one example. There's a zillion other examples.
Yeah.
Like
Right. Yeah. Thank you. Shalanda or Jessica, did you want to comment on that, the solutions perspective?
Well, I think some of the questions in the chat and in the Q&A open the door to the full range of possibilities. So I'm going to go back on mute and defer to you, Maria, as to how you want to proceed, because I think there's an exciting debate and discussion that's happening on the side here.
Yeah, I noticed that too. I'm trying to figure out the best path forward, because I definitely want to get to people's questions. I think what was brought up at energy system and fossil fuel industries are dominated by some of the largest and most localized industries in the world. One of the questions that I had was who holds the power in our current energy systems? I think we generally know that. And what can be done to redistribute that power to Indigenous people, people of color, or people who are poor? Do you guys have thoughts on that? Or even, geographic redistribution, right, as well?
Yeah, well, so I'll jump in here and thank you, Tim, for the question. It actually connects to Kathy's question, I think, as well. And she asked about activists and the connection between activists and power. And, there's a landscape in which we're all operating, right? And Maria, as you alluded to, there's power happening because of these, different industries that are holding on to power. So I should just go ahead and come clean. I just wrote a book on all of this, and it's called Revolutionary Power. It's available for pre-order on Island Press and Amazon, but it's Revolutionary Power, an activist guide to the energy transition. And it really lays out kind of the 5 sites that I see as ripe for intervention with respect to policy and with respect to some of the power dimensions that are coming up in the questions. So where this is all being played out is at the regulatory level in large part, right? There's a lot that's happening at local public utility commissions, public service commissions. Rules are being established that have outcomes. And so For those with time and those who want to gather neighbors, there are opportunities to provide public comments in regulatory matters that will impact your lives. And that's with respect to rates, that's with respect to siting in some cases, the full range of issues that are at play in this energy system and are active. The other kind of key areas that people should be interested in or think about are the utility sector, right? So our research team at IEJ focuses on utility justice and utility reform. What is the entity that should be leading the charge from fossil fuels to clean energy? Should it be an investor-owned entity, right? Tim's question is pointing to the fact that we've relied on investor-owned entities and given them essentially the franchise. We've granted them semi-monopoly status to be able to provide us with electricity for the last 100 years. Is that the best method now? I mean, we've incentivized them through reasonable returns on their investments. We've incentivized them in really interesting ways because, again, we wanted to electrify rural parts of the country. And so we created this system that is now becoming increasingly irrelevant given that we have distributed energy opportunities and rooftop solar and those sorts of things. So we need to question the utility. We need to think about whether or not that's the best entity to move us into the clean energy future, or if it should be co-ops, which I know have some mixed history in the Midwest, or if it should be public power, so municipal power providers, et cetera. We need to think about ways that communities can engage in rooftop solar, in community energy. Community energy has been held out as the avenue for low to moderate income communities to participate in this energy transition. But unfortunately, I'm not sure that the data is bearing that out. Our team is studying that to understand just whether community solar and community energy is the pathway for LMI communities and communities of color. We also need to think about energy burden, as Joel said, so that absolutely connects to energy efficiency, plugging up our homes, getting more dollars to move to the communities that need them, figuring out incentives through the regulatory system and through law and policy to get landlords to do some of that work, right? If you're in North Milwaukee or in North Madison and you are, you pay a landlord for rent, it's unlikely that you're going to be able to incentivize your landlord or ask them to be able to undertake a cumbersome process to seal your home. And Jessica's shaking her head. And we also need access to finance. So we need to create a new economic system that allows low-income communities and communities of color to participate in this solar revolution, the solar transition. So those are the areas that I see as ripe for intervention. There are a lot of people who've been raising questions in the chat that are saying, well, what is working? What is working? I hate to tell you folks, this is so new that we are creating the pathway as we walk on it. And that's the most exciting aspect of this transition, that we have this opportunity to shape the future based on our ideals, based on what we understand to be true about ourselves, based on what we believe. And this is the time for those who have been excluded from this conversation to engage. And this is why I think it's so important to do that work of translation from policymakers, from academia to policy, and academia to the social justice and civil rights community that understands what future they want, but often don't know what policy levers to push in order to get to that future. So everything is on the table. So, I mean, again, that's the most exciting part of this moment that we're in. And I'll let other folks chime in.
Jessica, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, I'll jump on that bandwagon. I'm excited too, and like your energy is super, super infectious. So thank you, Shalonda, for jumping us up on that. And I also love the questions, and I love the conversation. And I want to circle back to Kathy's question as well, which Shalonda, you were answering too, because I've spoken with Kathy about this, and this is also from that government perspective on engagement. And having worked in government for many, many years, I know there's a lot of disjointed conversations, and multiple people having same conversations with same communities about different things. And so I think there's, again, this opportunity here right in front of us to incorporate climate change, health, equity into every single department, every single office, every single agency, all of the work that we're doing to promote change and our day-to-day work, because as Shalanda, as you've said, it affects every single aspect of all of our lives. Energy affects everything. It's an intimate issue. Climate change is an intimate thing. It affects everyone differently, but in very unique ways. And all of what we call in public health the social determinants of health play into all of that. So when we're looking at, I know in the chat we're talking about transportation systems, we're looking at our education systems, we're looking at our housing, we're looking at our food systems, our economics, all the opportunities we have to make a healthy choice or not. It's just this fantastic opportunity to incorporate thinking about climate change when we're planning housing policies, when we're planning doing our community health impact planning through our health departments and so on. And so I just think that this cross-sector, cross-disciplinary planning around climate is possible, which wouldn't really need to increase resources to do that. It's just other than education and training on what you're really looking for when you're assessing for climate impacts and whatever sector you're working in. But if we had all of our, citizen committees working on this, beyond our, for example, our Sustainable Madison Committee, if it touched every single aspect that we're working on, those that are working in government, I think massive change is possible.
Maria, I just want to jump in here because there's a question in the chat that I'm just itching to answer. It's from Meg, and it was, it was posted at 6:03, and I'll just read the question for those who may have access issues. So if I were a working class white guy from somewhere north of Wausau County who has a good set of community friends in a similar situation, living near polluting facilities where I also work, can't afford to save enough to send my kids to college, has an ancient home with crappy windows and an ancient heating system, how do the panelists specifically suggest getting me to buy into your racial energy justice perspective? Thank you so much for this question. Thank you so much, Meg. Because my response is that it's not zero sum, right? We have created a system where everyone is fighting for scraps. And we can go back to the history that Joel alluded to at the beginning of his remarks, which is that we have pitted certain communities against each other, which is essentially leaving the power system intact. It is totally okay with those who hold power, for those who don't hold power, to fight with each other for the limited benefits that are available within this existing system. So what I would say to Meg, who is the working class white guy, is that I want you to band with me. I need you to be aligned with me, because if we can create a system that is equitable across the board, you will benefit. Your community will benefit. If we can create a system where we cap the amount of energy burden across the board, that means that all people are going to benefit. It doesn't mean that I get more because I'm Black. It just means that I'm in a system that is fair and that allows me to succeed. But we also know that all of the metrics, all of the measures on energy burden, on access to solar, on environmental justice, do fall on communities of color. They also fall on rural communities, but they do fall across the board in this country on communities of color. So we've got to reckon with that. We've got to deal with that. We have to be able to have this conversation. And what it means is that we have rural communities, we have urban communities aligning and allying around creation of policy that's going to benefit all of those communities. I think we haven't talked politics, but we will have a new administration in the White House January 21st. And what that means is that we're going to have a new outlook on, creating jobs through clean energy development. So that's going to benefit rural communities. That's going to benefit, the manufacturing belt, the Rust Belt, right? If we can think about a way to use this transition to benefit those who have been left behind, whether that's folks in rural communities, whether that's folks who are going to be struggling even more, because of COVID and the ongoing self-inflicted wound that we have now with COVID-19 and the economic crisis that's resulting from it. But we are going to have a new system, but we absolutely need to align. We need labor, we need the enviros, we need everybody to be kind of at the table so that we can map out a system that's going to work for all of us, because it's not zero sum. It can't be zero sum. We need poor white communities, urban communities to align themselves, to realize that there are benefits in it for all of us.
Thank you, Shalonda. That was going to be my next. I saw that too, so I'm glad you pulled that question out. That was awesome. I think Jessica or Joel, would you like to comment on that specific question?
I just want to add, just quickly, just to share with others that I attended a webinar today by the American Public Health Association focusing on environmental justice. And Donna Chavis was on presenting, and some might know that she's one of the original founders, if you will, of our present environmental justice movement in the United States. And she's currently the senior campaigner around fossil fuels for Friends of the Earth. And she shared a great example of exactly what Shalonda is talking about on their efforts to stop a proposed Atlantic Coast pipeline that was proposed to go through many communities of low wealth and people of color, but all different races, all different communities. And they found ways that communities could connect around that common good. So again, that building bridges. For example, there were over 30,000 Indigenous peoples that were going to be directly impacted by this. But the first environmental impact statement that was approved, that approved the pipeline, stated that there were no disproportionate impacts. And so part of their job was to work together across all the differences of all the different communities to prove that wasn't correct, and focuses on what they were there for. And so it was a really easy way to cross those boundaries, to connect and work together for the common goal, for that common good. And really, she saw her role as entering into these conversations, listening with curiosity rather than with solutions, with what we think is the best thing to do, because the communities then could learn from each other and appreciating all the different ways that they could connect for that common good. And they were able to stop the pipeline in that way. So I just wanted to share that success story that I just learned about today.
That's great.
And the only thing I'd add is, and this goes back to what Shalonda said, and it ties to what Jessica said as well. None of these solutions are going to be purely individual in most cases. People in the chat, people say, well, how's this going to benefit me individually? Often is what I'm picking up. And if you got the cash to retrofit your own home or drill your geothermal system on your own, then maybe you can get the benefit individually, but that's a very rare person. What we're talking about in general is better systems that enable you individually to benefit from group goods or shared systems in some way. And for that, you're going to have to talk to other people. You're going to, I don't know about political action, but you're certainly going to need to take social action. You're going to have to talk to your neighbors and get them to agree with you on doing something together, which is not exactly rocket science, but does require us to exercise our, I don't know, our humanity muscles or our, listening muscles or something or other. But above all, in the case of talking about, the descending half of the species of which the guy who wrote in is, I'm a member of, the men. Yeah, it just requires that we not be complete dicks and not just get our socks into the hamper, but be willing to listen to other people and try to work towards solutions rather than immediately identify people as opponents and not hear the story that everyone's got, that very few people can really tell. Why did they come to the view that they came to now? Just talking to people, listening to people, and not going in with a whole bunch of opinions, but finding out why they're where they are now on any particular issue. So you can call it deep canvassing. I would just call it listening with some respect and not being a jerk.
I think thank you. And I think, as we start moving, especially honing in on Wisconsin and the clean energy plan here in the state, that is one thing that I've continuously said, that people are coming from different value systems. People are coming from different perspectives, and those should be respected. just making sure that we have these conversations and understand that we don't want to be forcing anything upon people. Like, we want to be having that back and forth stakeholder engagement, because we have to know where a community is coming from, or like where even just an individual is coming from. Because if you don't have that conversation, you don't understand their value system, you're not going to get anywhere. So I appreciate everyone's comments on that. I think just shifting a little bit, some of the, some people, and I'm kind of looking across the questions, and there have been some questions on success stories for equitable clean energy transition. And, are there specific examples of people, communities, organizations that are doing really great work in energy and climate justice? I mean, I can name a few, but I would love to hear more. And then how can UW-Madison or our community support that work? And then also too, as an extension of that, like some of these organizations that are doing great work and success stories, but then as an extension, like, where are the resources coming? Is it federal, state, foundation? Like, where are the resources for this, so that we can kind of sync up the great work and the resources needed to carry out that great work?
Well, the stuff I was talking about at the outset, and I don't want to go on, that comes from the savings themselves. So the money comes from eliminating the waste. All you need is a chunk of money that anyone could put up front. The state could do it, as other states have done, like Pennsylvania and California, a variety of other states. You borrow that money to do the work, and you pay that money back out of the savings achieved. It's a zero addition cost to the state. It just needs to get organized. Period.
Shalonda and Jessica, do you have thoughts on success stories?
Sure. Yeah, I do. This is such a far-ranging conversation. I mean, I'm just thinking from the sort of big picture structural problems, race, COVID, all the things. And I'm seeing like some really granular brass tacks questions that I also love and can get into as well. But in terms of your direct question, Maria, about the success stories, I mean, the New York Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act was signed into law last summer. And that was the product of advocacy by a coalition of labor and EJ communities in New York. So the CLCPA is a great example of a piece of legislation that actually reflects the need to incorporate environmental justice concerns. There's a carve out of 35% for disadvantaged communities, baked into the law with respect to climate investments. So that's already there. Now we have to figure out how we define communities that do get those benefits, right? I mean, there are a bunch of different metrics that may not only be racial metrics, right? They may be other metrics of vulnerability. But the law also calls for the convening of an environmental justice group, an advisory committee to sort of advise policymakers on how the law gets rolled out. So New York is a bright spot for me in a lot of ways. I mean, the folks on the ground there have been fighting for decades to get something like CLCPA passed. I think we can also look at organizations. I mean, there's some interest in community energy throughout the questions here. We can look at organizations like Co-op Power, which is all about trying to get community-owned energy up and running around the country. So they're great. We do have a recognition in the traditional civil rights community that energy is something that folks should be engaged in, because the new system is being designed before our eyes, and it's baking in the same problems into the new system, right? So I think I'm encouraged by a lot of faith communities. Huda Alkef in Wisconsin, she runs Wisconsin Green Muslims. She's been really interested in figuring out ways to bring community voices and faith communities into the energy transition. I go all the way to California to get another bright spot. SB 535 is a law that is designed to distribute the benefits of the cap and trade system to disadvantaged communities in California, in recognition that these communities have been impacted by the dirty system. And if we're moving into this transition, we need to reinvest resources in those environmental justice and disadvantaged communities. So there are bright spots all over the place. And again, I'm never one to plug, but our organization, IEJ, the Initiative for Energy Justice, is really trying to, recognize and acknowledge all of that good work that's happening at the grassroots, and to also give voice to some of the hopes and dreams of organizations around the country so that they can be reflected in energy policy. There's great work happening in the Midwest. Again, I'll shout out Melissa Gavin, who runs the REAMP network, which is a coalition of about 100 plus organizations and all over the Midwest, from Iowa to Minnesota to Wisconsin, people embedded in rural communities who are now interested in climate and energy policy, and they now have a commitment to equity issues. So, and again, equity doesn't always have to have a racial dimension, but based on our national story and our origin story, it often does have a racial dimension. So, I want to acknowledge that too. So there are folks in the Midwest doing great work. There are folks in California and New York who've had some huge wins. Oregon and Washington State are places to watch, I think, in terms of how they roll out their ambitious climate and energy programs by engaging communities in those discussions. I have actually something to respond to one of the technical comments, but I'm going to stop because I want to give other people airtime too.
Just to say that a lot of the examples were in the current notation on politics, blue states or blue city examples, but there's a ton of stuff going on down south, in the deep south, in the southeast, in the southwestern portions of the country. There's stuff going on in the mountain states, traditionally redder areas of the country, both at the state level and then in particular at the municipal level, counties, cities, towns, villages, etc. There's so much stuff, it's impossible to organize, and there's so many people contributing and so many different organizations. I'm hesitant to name 1, 2, or 3, but I can name the places where you can go to find out the range of things that are going on out there. I would look at Energy News or Energy Climate News, which is a good news service you can get on. There's something called something Wire. I'm blanking on it right now. Cows itself, the thing I run in Wisconsin, has lots and lots of stuff on this with lots of examples from all over the country. And if you want to get examples of model bills or legislation or other things, go to ProGov 21, which is a new thing that Cows has started, which is mostly oriented toward municipal government, but has some things in there around states. So that's PROGOV 21 for the century that we're in .org, or Cows. Guys can remember that, COWS.org. Lots and lots of stuff up there.
And a number of these websites are being posted in the chat. So like if you can open it from chat and then bookmark it right away. That's what I do. Jessica, did you want to make any comments on that?
Again, these are experts on climate and energy justice and so on. But I just want to, I guess, while we're doing some shout outs to Indigenous efforts also that have ranged from direct confrontations against extractive industries to policy work at international and national levels, to knowledge networks that are seeking to reform climate science and innovations at the level of local practical planning processes and so on. And for example, I know that the Ho-Chunk Nation, in all their new housing developments, they're using solar. There's food justice work, food sovereignty work being done with the community. The Menominee Nation also has an incredible Sustainable Development Institute with the College of the Menominee Nation that's really, was recently highlighted in the U.S. Climate Resilience Toolkit. And then also the Forest County Potawatomi also are actively working towards energy independence and sovereignty. So check out a lot of the leadership in our Native nations too.
Excellent. Shalanda, I want to let you get to your technical question, but one thing I wanted to ask is that there's a lot of excitement on deployment of technology, and even in the chat, not everybody's having the best experience, right? And so I think, how do we encourage more engagement? Like there's many of the states have one policy, but also rate making processes that people just aren't familiar with, or aren't familiar with the how they can get involved in decision making when they feel so far away from it. Again, because it's not something that is in the front. It's like they're worrying about taking care of families, or putting food on their table, or getting to work, or whatever it may be, that they don't know this is happening, and they don't know they have a voice in the process. So not every experience in deployment of renewables is necessarily the greatest. So do you have thoughts on how to expand that engagement and ensure those voices are being heard at that decision-making level?
Organize, organize, organize.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we need base building, and this is why my hair is on fire, and why I started IEJ, because again, the system is being created and it's replicating inequality. And my first lesson in this was in Mexico over a decade ago, where I met Indigenous people who were fighting against large scale wind, right? And so wind and solar can replicate inequality. We need to know that. And it's not popular to say that, because obviously we need to mitigate climate change, but we don't have to do it in this sort of extractive, exploitative way that takes advantage of the most vulnerable members in our society. And so I think for me, it starts out of the gate with your 100% renewable portfolio standard or ambitious climate legislation, where you bake into that legislation carve outs, or even, I would argue, centering the needs of your most vulnerable population, so that when it comes time to create new energy projects, those energy projects have to be aligned with the principles that are established in the law. But you have to organize at your legislature. You have to be, trying to educate. And I've met so many traditional social justice, civil rights advocates who are now like, I'm an energy expert because I have to be. And so, it's coalition building, it's organizing, and those comments in those regulatory proceedings are so important. Often there's a siting board. I'm a member of our Massachusetts Energy Facilities Siting Board. I saw a shout out from a Northeastern person in the chat. I don't know if she's still on the call. But our board decides where, how, or whether facilities should be sited in certain places. So you have to get engaged, in these very sort of technocratic, Byzantine processes, but they matter. Your voice matters, and organizing matters. And I think now is a really interesting moment where people are more aware of equity, more aware of distributive consequences, and more open to those types of arguments. I would also say that, so that's not just at the policymaking level in terms of being open, but I think even academics. So if you're not an expert or you don't feel comfortable making comments, find out where your local law school, your local university is, if maybe you can create a partnership with them in some way to support your work. So I know that's a big task, but you have to organize in order to make a difference here.
And if the university is, for example, intimidating for anybody on this call, just go to the University Alliance, which is supposed to be an open door to all the academic strengths at the University of Wisconsin for any community that wants to take advantage of them. That's what it's there for. University Alliance, with the penultimate syllable in university spelled with a C, not an S. University Alliance. And check out their website. And they're working in communities all over Wisconsin through their university year program and other sorts of things. And they're red communities, blue communities, rural communities, urban communities. I mean, this is going to affect everybody, and there's opportunity everywhere. There's opportunity in rural areas to capture some photons and cut down on the flooding. There are opportunities in every single community. What you need is some leadership, and then some people willing to work with other people. And the world is round.
Jessica, did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I'm taking it all in, and I know the real struggle with communities that their priority is not to get evicted. Their priority is to, make sure there's food on the table. Their priority is to have healthy opportunities and decrease risk of violence for their children. Also worried about PFAS in the water, also worried about F-35s going over their houses, also worried about other environmental justice issues, let alone in energy justice. And so I keep coming back to, again, I did see in the chat, we have other nurses in there, and want to shout out to the Wisconsin Health Professionals for Climate Action, because the more I think people that touch everyone in their everyday work, teachers, health professionals, community health workers that are in the communities already, community social workers working on all these issues, to also be thinking about energy justice, to also be thinking about all these other opportunities for engagement and organizing, and to really lift up this lived expertise that we have in communities that are on their front lines of all of these public health pandemics, whether it's racism, climate change, and all the COVID, all the pandemics that we're dealing with. We have so much expertise and voice and agency, and that are in these communities, and people that are already working with them on all of these different issues. I think, again, getting climate in there is really essential.
A question came in on an umbrella group serving low-income people in fear of eviction. Wisconsin has a WISCAP that can do that. We at our weatherization area, our low-income heating assistance program, they've been using CARES Act funding to help with rental assistance and weatherization. So there are some resources there. But I do want to jump back to Shalonda. I know that you had a technical question. I don't know, like we kind of veered off, but certainly want to address. And I'd like to open, we have about 10 minutes, 9 minutes left. So if there are particular questions that you guys saw that maybe I missed, there's a lot coming in, which is so awesome, but definitely want you guys to snag some questions that you would like to feel particularly passionate about answering.
Yeah, I mean, Maria, you're doing a great job. It's amazing. There's a lot of activity going on in the chat here. I wanted to get back to different market approaches and different things that we can be doing, public-private partnerships to facilitate a just transition. My hope above all hopes is that Congress will act and move serious federal dollars to the states post-pandemic. We know that there are revenue shortfalls with respect to states and cities. I mean, it's just it's a mess. It's a fiscal mess. And we also know that we have a lot of folks who have some arrearages. So energy bills that are going to come due as soon as these public health emergencies lapse, and regulators decide to lift the moratoria on utility shutoffs. So we need serious funds going into states and into homes to relieve some of the economic pressure that's happening. I'm hoping that there will be a mechanism to create green banks to help to facilitate, investments in clean energy in environmental justice communities and in communities that have been underserved. So what that would look like is very cheap capital flowing into communities where, I'm essentially getting either a grant or a very low interest loan that I have to pay back. And I can, as Joel said, maybe pay it back through my electricity bill instead of having to pay it back separately, right? And I'm paying it back over time at very low risk. So we need the federal government to really, really move dollars. And I think green banks are interesting. And, New York has a green bank, Connecticut has a green bank. New York's bank is not really off the ground as much as you would hope. Hawaii has a green bank that is now pivoting to serve low income folks. So we need low cost capital to be infused into states and in communities. We also, from a sort of regulatory and legal perspective, community choice aggregation is an area that isn't discussed a lot. And so that basically means communities It's usually set out by law, and it allows communities to come together and say, we no longer want to buy electricity from our utility. We want to either invest or figure out a way to procure energy from another provider that we are more aligned with. And we also, maybe if you're a justice-oriented community choice aggregator, you can say we also would like our most vulnerable members to have the lowest rates. And we want to design our electricity rates in this collective to be fair and just. So I think there's a lot of space for innovation at the legal level and at the finance level. California's cap and trade program is controversial in some ways. I mean, cap and trade is controversial in some ways because it leaves the dirtiest facilities to it's cheaper for them to just buy the permits to pollute than actually change their operations. So it leads to hotspots in communities, which are typically communities of color. So the thing I do like about what California is doing is that they are reinvesting, the money that they're making off of cap and trade into communities of color. Again, folks, we're at the very beginning of this. We need time to study how some of these things are coming out. But this is a time for incredible innovation. And as I mentioned before, I'm really hopeful that we'll do things right, or else we'll have a revolution. So, hey, it's one or the other, and it could be a positive revolution as well. Sorry, Maria, you're on mute.
Yeah, we can't hear you, Maria.
Every meeting, it happens once. Are there any questions or that you'd like to address here in the next couple minutes? Otherwise, we can start kind of wrapping it up and pull together some final thoughts.
I just want to say I appreciate the range of questions, from the technical to the social, to the, confounding in terms of how they fit. I appreciate the honesty and the dynamics that tend to emerge when you talk about justice. So very honored to share the stage with everyone, and also with the folks who are on this and the webinar behind the scenes.
Jessica and Joel, would you like to make any final comments? We're heading into our last few minutes here.
Well, I wish we'd been able to talk more about the flooding thing that Jessica was sort of beginning us with, which I think is going to just be, for Wisconsin in particular, in the upper Midwest, which is going to get a ton of rain. That in some ways is even more pressing than the electricity rates and other stuff here. I mean, not to start the discussion over again, the example that Jessica was starting with, where you have these lake owners that don't want to have the lake levels lowered in a way that can prevent the incidence of flooding in these poor neighborhoods. You cannot get more clear on property interest versus the public welfare than that fight. So there's going to be a lot of politics here. But the only thing I'd add in closing is, if we work together, we can make ourselves, including as a community, almost anything that we're clever and courageous enough to imagine ourselves becoming. So why don't we make ourselves a democratic and mutually respectful community? We've done it before, with never perfectly, but that is the project that Wisconsin should get back to. And Wisconsin for a long time punched well above its weight, and now it's punching well below its weight in terms of democratic innovation and spreading opportunity all over the place, and the sort of compression of the income distribution and other things. It's always been a racist place, and the progressives who made Wisconsin famous were notoriously racist. John R. Commons was racist. That's not new. What's really new is Wisconsin has sort of, the last several years, lost its mojo or whatever, its willingness to do some stuff together in a way that can stand up to predatory corporate power and self-defeating internal division and racism and other stuff. That's where the fight is, and that's the thing that we're all capable of doing tomorrow, or with our kids and our neighbors, like today. And you're not going to get out of this unless you work together. So agape forever, everybody. That's my message.
Thank you, Joel. And Jessica, any final thoughts?
Well, I just thank you, Joel. Thank you, Shalonda, Maria, and all the participants, all the questions. The conversation has been, I'm always inspired, and I always learn so much from everyone in these conversations. And so I'm just very grateful for that. Yeah, the issue of flooding is an ongoing, obvious concern. There are conversations. There's a task force, I believe, at the county and state levels working on these issues, not just in our county, but across the entire state. The state health department is looking at flooding across the state and overlaying different social, economic justice impacts of that as well in different communities, I believe. And so there is work happening. But as Shalonda has said multiple times, it's just sort of like emerging where we're waking up collectively to this crisis, but also to the opportunities that the crisis brings, especially when looking at it with a health and social justice lens. So I invite us all to kind of keep that on and continue to work together collaboratively, but always centering those that have that lived expertise. Thank you.
Well, we have hit the dot on the mark, and we are at the end. I think I would just like to thank Shalonda, Jessica, and Joel so much for your insight. What a great discussion. I wish we could keep going, but obviously we can't keep it going here. I did add my email address and my phone number, as the Lieutenant Governor and Governor have asked me to move forward with developing a comprehensive clean energy plan for the state. And I take this job very seriously, and again, want to make sure that we're continuing this discussions. It's very stakeholder driven. I want to hear all the voices, and I want to make this a very interactive process, and I'm looking forward to pulling it all together, and hopefully by early next year having a plan of action, making it actionable, really putting some fervor and spirit behind what we're doing, and making sure that we're working for every citizen here in the state. So thank you for your time, and I will pass it over to Scott.
Thank you so much, Maria, for moderating this discussion, and thank you to all our panelists. It was really eye-opening and enlightening discussion, and probably have to watch it a couple more times just to take everything in again. And there were some questions about saving the video or links that were discussed. We'll save those and post those on our event page. And if you do have any, excuse me, suggestions for future forums where we might use this as a starting point and maybe delve into a particular topic, feel free to send us an email at outreach@energy.wis.edu. Thank you all for your questions, wide range of questions. This is the last forum of the fall semester. So we'll start back up again toward the end of January. And so just be on the lookout for our upcoming events. And my cat Lily wants to say hi and say hi to the web universe. Thanks all for joining us, and we hope to see you in future Board and Energy forums.
Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Scott.
Thank you, everyone.